Welcome back, guys. The Model A is already on hold again until next week. I can't leave the shop and go get all of the materials we need to get started because I just tested positive for COVID. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, but still good enough to be in here tinkering instead of sitting at home. I'd be out of my mind. So instead, we're gonna turn our attention back to the 308. You guys have been patient. I've got a few new parts to throw on it. We're gonna get those unboxed, installed. We're gonna put the wiring harness back in this thing. And then honestly, from there, we gotta figure it out as we go. It's been a long time since we've worked on it, and I have no idea what comes next. I don't plan this stuff out. So let's dive into it and see how far we get. Yep, all the parts I have to show for a month of waiting fit into this one small box. It's not very much, but it's at least something to make a little bit of progress. Inside, we've got a series of ignition system parts that have been on back order for longer than I can even remember. I ordered this stuff quite some time ago, and it finally showed up from across the pond. So, let's get this stuff opened up, and let me give you a rundown of what we've got. First on the list is this billet adapter plate for K20 and K24 engines. And the purpose of this CNC'd piece is to allow us to run these OEM Nissan R35 GTR coil packs. And with them, we've got new stalks to adapt them to the proper coil pack length for a K-Series engine. Now these didn't come with any instructions on how to swap them out, so I'm doing what anybody would do with brand new parts that they cannot replace due to back orders across the world, and just pulled it apart. But that seems like it was the right move as everything swapped over and went together nicely. So let's knock out the other three. There was a small part inside of each of these that looked something like a fuse, and Google wouldn't really tell me what it was, but if you do this yourself, make sure it doesn't go flying or you'll never find it again. The PRP adapter is machined for these stalks specifically, and the fitment is really nice. Everything's keyed so that it all bolts together correctly and nothing moves around on you. And while this thing's not ready to run yet, at least I don't have to worry about anything falling into the engine anymore. Hooray! Like 10 minutes of actual progress transformed into like 2 hours of filming and setting up cameras and unboxing and all of that BS. So that's how this build actually goes. With that done, we need to tackle something else. I think next on the list is probably building a battery box. We need to build something to hold our anti-gravity battery, make sure that it's stout and secure in case we do have an accident. I'm thinking we'll build something out of aluminum, but let's draw this thing up in CAD and design something cool, and then we'll make it. Scratch that, we time traveled, it's dark outside. I've spent the last 2 hours trying to get Fusion to open and my computer keeps crashing, so I can't design a box right now. So instead, I'm gonna make that other intercooler end tank that I messed up several episodes ago. You guys have seen how I've done it already. I already walked you through it, so instead this time we'll just get the funk out like the guys over at Bad Obsession, and you guys can watch me make it in a cool montage. I don't know, let's do this. And there we have it, a completed end tank for our intercooler. I didn't want to mess up the montage, but I do want to show you guys one thing while I was building it. I overbent one of the panels, and this gives me an opportunity to show you guys one of my absolute favorite shop tricks. I've shown this before, but it's worth talking about again. Using any kind of press, whether it's an arbor press like this one, or even just a simple hydraulic press, you can actually unbend sheet metal without damaging it. Using any sort of round stock like you see here, simply press it into the bend. Smaller diameters work better, but it'll take more force to press. As you can see here, it'll unbend the sheet metal, and if we flip this plate over, you'll see from the backside that there's no distortion whatsoever. Now let's work on that battery box. The battery we'll be using is this featherweight anti-gravity 51R. And it's going to need a custom enclosure so that we can actually mount it into the car. Let me show you what I'm thinking. My thought process is to mount it here in the wheel well for a number of reasons. For starters, there's a nice platform that we can actually mount the bracket to. It's steel and rather strong. The other benefit here is that we're really close to the ECU. We can run our power cables to the other side of this wall right here. And last but not least, it's low for the center of gravity and out of the way. So let's design a box to put it in. I drew up a rudimentary battery in Fusion 360 so that we can build the box around it. I drew up some sides, did it with the sheet metal tools, drew a clasp that'll close over top of it, and ended with something like this, a pretty simple aluminum box that will lock the battery into place. It uses a simple hinge and a locking pin, and should keep the battery from going anywhere. So now we just need to make it. All right, next morning, I'm here bright and early, ready to make this battery box, and started pulling stuff together, getting cameras ready, and I have found out that the only material I have here to make this thing out of is this like crazy thick 3/16" aluminum. And while I really want to make this battery box, I don't want to make it that bad. That's just the wrong material. It's super overkill. It doesn't need to be made out of that. It'll just make it heavier than it needs to be. And if I'm going to make it heavy, I might as well just make it out of steel. So unfortunately, I guess I'm not going to make that. Instead, I guess I'll send this thing out to get laser cut, and we'll make it next week or something. And to add to that, even if I was going to make it out of that stuff, one, I can't bend that. That's 6000 series. And two, I'm out of welding gas. So this sucks. I can't leave the shop and go get things that I need. I can't go get welding gas. I think I'm out of aluminum filler rod. I can't go get material. This sucks. I mean, it's the right thing to do, but ugh. All right, let's figure out what we're going to do next. Let me brainstorm for a minute. Be right back. With the intake side of the engine done, as well as from the cylinder head to the turbo, the wiring, and most of the plumbing, I realized I should be focusing on things that'll make the engine run. We have some aspects of the oil system left to finish up, and one of those is installing this Scavenge pump for the turbocharger. The turbo on the 308 is mounted really low, and it means we need some way to pull oil out of it and send it back to our oil tank. Our dry sump pump could have done this job for us, but I'd have to add another stage to it, adding a lot of costs, and this is a good alternative. We need to build a bracket in order to mount this thing to the 308's chassis, but thankfully it does include 4 mounting holes and some rubber isolators, so it should be a pretty easy job. We just need to measure it up, and then once again draw this thing up in Fusion 360 so that we have a template to work from. If we snap our fingers, we get a bracket that looks something like this, and we can unfold it to give ourselves a template, as we always do. Now we just need to transform it into sheet metal. Off camera, I chopped this thing up on the bandsaw, giving us a rough outline that we need to clean up on the belt sander. This cheap one from Home Depot has worked great for nearly a year now. I wanted to add a dimple die to the middle of this bracket, mostly just to make it a bit more interesting, but this press of mine is on its last leg and couldn't flatten the part out entirely. I thought for a second that I had totally destroyed this thing, but I worked around a little bit, flattened it out most of the way, and used the brake to finish it out. All right, and after bending it, there we have it. We've got a nice little bracket that should straddle part of the chassis. It will bolt up to the oil pump and should be very simple to weld around the perimeter once we pull everything out. Several of you guys have asked, and I know that you don't catch every episode, most of the stuff in the engine bay still has to get welded. The engine does have to come back out. Everything is going to get painted. A lot of this stuff that needs welding in there, I'm going to wait until there's not an engine in the way. So that'll come. Let's mock it up. It's a really simple bracket, but I think it works pretty well. It'll be nice and easy to weld into place, and it holds the pump right where we need it to be, just below the height of the turbo, and in line on its way back to the oil tank. We should have provisions in our wiring harness because we planned on putting it here, so this installation, aside from welding, is more or less done, and we just need to plumb it into place. I showcased the RyWire engine harness in a previous episode, but I feel like it's worth taking another quick look at because it's truly a work of art. It's one of the nicest parts on the entire car. Thankfully, it's pretty easy to install and remove because we've got to put it back in the car once again. The main mil-spec bulkhead connector connects to the firewall, which on the other side goes directly to the ECU. Part of this thing will loop around the engine on one side, and we've just got to route it underneath the intake and the intercooler so that we can get it to the back of the car. Having the ignition system in place really isn't a huge milestone, but it does make the engine bay look that much more complete, and I'm definitely happy with the progress. The Scavenge pump is officially in place, and we can cross it off the list, and we've got the end tanks on our intercooler, meaning aside from welding and the need for one fitting, it's totally done. I'll need to go through and check and make sure all of our hoses are finished, but I think we can cross this off the list too. All right, so we got our ignition stuff installed, the wiring harness put back in the car and partly hooked up. We've got an oil pump mounted. We've got a battery box designed and our intercooler end tanks all wrapped up. It's not a ton of progress, but it's something. It's all little stuff. This is what you guys want right now. This is what we're gonna get. I can't get anything really cool and exciting done on the 308 right now until we have big and exciting parts so that we can get further into the project. So I know somebody out there is going to be like, dude, a whole episode dedicated to a bracket and a stupid aluminum piece. What the heck? But can't please them all. Baby steps. It's the only way to get this car done. So some stuff crossed off the list. I'll start thinking about what comes next. And I presume Tuesday's episode will be 308 again because can't work on the Model A right now. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. As always, I appreciate the support. Don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying the content. Come back, keep watching. It helps me out. Leave me some feedback. Tell me what you think of the build so far. I'll catch you guys on Tuesday. See you then.